Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. I hope that you're well. I hope you enjoyed the Qatar Grand Prix because the first ever Formula 1 Qatar Grand Prix kept to the 2021 script to an absolute T. It was an amazing race, and I know that I was a little bit worried about this track beforehand. Honestly, I didn't think that this track was going to lend itself to great Formula 1 racing, and to be fair, we didn't really see too much wheel-to-wheel action. We only really saw overtakes down into turn 1. But it more became about behind the scenes. It more became about those teams trying to get the strategy right, trying to get those tyres going in the right direction. Obviously, some teams did not manage to get the tyres going in the right direction, but the strategy game between the teams was absolutely immense. And it ended up being like this. And if you'd have asked me to predict this lineup, don't think I would have. It was absolute bedlam when it came to those tyres, and lots of things happened throughout the Grand Prix. But let's start at the front, because Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen are just in a league of their own at this point. How are they so much quicker than everybody else? It's just crazy to me how much pace those two can get out of those cars. And I know they're in the two fastest cars on the grid, but even so, they were just sublime throughout the entire weekend. And it is no wonder to me that they are the two battling for this championship. And the fact that the championship gets ever closer and could still go either way. Another 1-2 for them. Verstappen, even dropping back 5 places, has now an 8-point lead in the championship. 2 races to go. And Verstappen could actually win the championship next time around if things go his way. He needs to finish second or above, and Lewis Hamilton needs to finish sort of in and around either outside the points, or I think it's higher than 7th to keep himself in the title battle. So it's going to be very, very close. And I think personally it's going to go down to the wire. Don't think I can see Lewis Hamilton coming 8th or 9th in the next race. But a few people were actually saying that Lewis Hamilton's pace was absolutely crazy and that it was impossible for Max Verstappen to have ever caught him. I think Max Verstappen was phenomenal in this race. I don't know if I'm missing something, but Hamilton had a pretty big head start, by the way. He did start on pole position, went down into turn 1 comfortably in the lead, while Max Verstappen still had to make his way through the rest of the pack. He had, AlphaTauri's in the way, he had Alpines in the way, and it was quite a tricky little start for Max Verstappen, and he dealt with it perfectly. And by the time he got behind Lewis Hamilton, Hamilton was already, 6-7 seconds ahead of him and just matched him throughout the entire Grand Prix. It's not like Lewis Hamilton did anything crazy. It's not like Max Verstappen did anything mental. They just matched each other for pace throughout the entire Grand Prix. And I think, even though Verstappen wasn't going to catch Hamilton at any point, he was still showing his quality, and I don't think there was that much of a difference between the Red Bull and the Mercedes pace throughout the entire race. And Lewis Hamilton now puts himself in a really good position, obviously has the momentum with him. Brazil, now Qatar, 2 races in a row. He's won 30 races out of the 35 tracks that he's ever driven at, by the way. Mental. That is absolutely mental. There's only 5 different racetracks that he's ever not won at. That just shows his quality. And who do you think will be the World Drivers' Champion? I think I've just given up at predicting at this point. It is impossible to call. It really could go either way, couldn't it? We just have to sit back and enjoy what has been one of the best seasons of Formula 1 we're ever likely to see. And talking about sort of the World Drivers' Championship, we have to take a little bit of a look behind the scenes at Red Bull, because Christian Horner lost his mind. And I think we're going to see this more and more. We've seen Toto Wolff in Brazil pointing at cameras. We're now seeing Christian Horner having a go at Marshalls because Verstappen lost 5 places under double yellows. This was the incident where Pierre Gasly obviously broke down in qualification. His front wing came off and just sheared his front right tyre. And the yellow flags were waved by the marshals sort of through turn 15, 16, and then all the way down that sort of start-finish straight as well, where Gasly ended up stopping the car. And, I have to side with the FIA for the first time, I think, ever in this season. I think Christian Horner was massively in the wrong. I know that Christian Horner was unhappy with this rogue marshal, as he put it, but as I said, this was happening throughout various corners. You've got marshal posts sort of sectioned throughout each, and each marshal post kind of has their own interpretation of what is going on. The marshals that were on the start-finish straight waved double yellow flags. Max Verstappen has to slow down at some point. I know he's going for the championship, but he has to slow down. It's yellow flags. It's in the rules. It's cut and dry. And I don't think Christian Horner really had a leg to stand on here. But in the end, obviously, Verstappen came out in second anyway. Horner shouldn't have said those things about the marshal, but did apologise. But absolutely lost his head in this title fight. And I think we could see Christian Horner possibly losing his head a little bit more over the next 2 races if things don't go Red Bull's way. And I'm going to praise the FIA here. I think they did the right thing. They brought Horner in after the race. They made him apologise to the steward and the marshals. They made him apologise for what he said. And obviously he said it was obviously in the heat of the moment. But you have to side with the FIA here. Even though I do want to say, like, how on earth did it take them so long to make this decision? It was fairly cut and dry. We had to wait, again, like hours and hours on the decision for Verstappen and Bottas and Sainz for no real reason. If they didn't slow down, it's a penalty. Please, can we be a little bit quicker about this FIA? Just a tad, because I was trying to change, qualification rankings continually throughout the morning, and I still got it wrong before the race. So it was very, very confusing and didn't need to take that long. Another thing that was confusing was the tyres just completely gave up on themselves. It was just punctures galore. Bottas, Norris, Russell, Latifi, all the front left tyre as well, all of them completely disappearing from underneath the car. And obviously, Gasly had a puncture in qualification 2. That wasn't the same thing, though. That was because in turn 15, he sort of hit over the curbs a little bit too hard. His front wing broke off, and that was a different story. But during the race, it was just purely that front right tyre just gave up at points throughout the race. And Pirelli have been with F1 since 2012, and they had to make an educated guess on this Grand Prix. They told the teams that they opted for the hardest compound of tyres, the C1 to C3. They opted really, really hard. They knew that this track was going to be very, very heavy on the tyres, and Pirelli advised a 2-stop strategy. So what do the teams do? Obviously not a 2-stop strategy. Why did some teams just be like, no, I'm not going to listen to that. Not going to listen to Pirelli, who have put together these tyres for the last 10 years, pretty much, in Formula 1. And lots of teams ended up risking a 1-stop strategy. And as I said, the track was just torrid on these tyres. The amount of degradation was heavy. It was hot. It was dusty. There was so much going against these tyres, let alone the fact that the curbs and the corners are all high speed as well. Like, it was just a culmination of things that were bad for Formula 1 tyres overall. And you might remember we saw a similar sort of thing with Stroll and Verstappen earlier on in the season in Baku, where they just went what seemed to be a little bit too long on those tyres and a little bit too far on those Pirellis. And there's a lot more learning to do for Pirellis, the teams. Obviously, the tyres are going to change massively next year, but I really hope we don't see this kind of incident again. I said it after Baku. It's very, very dangerous. Luckily, none of the drivers sort of careered off into the distance this time around. Bottas, Norris, Russell, Latifi were all able to sort of keep it under control. But it's not something we want to see. And I think the teams need to be a little bit more careful about following Pirelli's guidance, especially in these new tracks, as I said, where things they don't know could happen. Like, it was very dusty. They didn't realise that the track was very, very green. There was no rubber put down from any other racing series over the course of the weekend either. It was very hot. It all went against those tyres. But hopefully Pirelli and the Formula 1 can work that out in the future a little bit more. I feel like we've talked for a long time without talking about the main event, really, of this Grand Prix. If I pop this up here, Fernando Alonso in 3rd place in an Alpine. Another podium for the man. And one man who actually managed to make the 1-stop work. So maybe I should just absolutely be quiet about that, because he did a 1-stop strategy. Started on the soft compound tyre, ended on the hard compound tyre. And I've got to hold my hands up here. I was wrong about Fernando Alonso at the beginning of the season. I thought, with 2 years out, age not being on his side, and I thought he might come back into Formula 1 and just be a bit of a placeholder. I thought, Ocon was maybe going to lead that team and Alonso was going to end up being the placeholder driver. Absolutely not. He is 17 points ahead of his teammate. He is right in and amongst it with those guys in the midfield and showing that he is the top quality driver, sort of from 10th down. I don't think you'd pick anybody else to be in that car. And you could say he's even had a better season than the likes of Ricciardo that are ahead of him too, in my opinion. I think maybe just it's edging it, isn't it? Because Ricciardo's obviously won a race. But since Baku, the 6th race of the season, like, only took him 5 races to get back into Formula One form, which is mind-blowing to me. He has been so good and so consistent. Like, he's always been there. And I think, you know, this is a standout performance. If I think off the top of my head, Hungary and Russia stand out for me as well, for being just, you know, vintage Fernando Alonso, showing that he's got absolutely everything going on his side, and obviously dragging Alpine to 5th in the Constructors too. They were level on points with AlphaTauri. We'll talk about AlphaTauri and Gasly in a moment, but just the way he's been able to drag Alpine along. When Ocon had that dip in the middle of the season, sort of, you know, Monaco to Silverstone, Ocon was looking a bit nothingness, and Ocon's had a few drives this year where he's been a bit anonymous. I haven't really remembered anything that he's done in the race, but Fernando Alonso just always seems to be there. There always seems to be a talking point. And not only that, he stood up to the FIA whilst being this incredible driver. He's talked about track limits. He's talked about lap ones of the Grand Prix, things that I believe in, things that I think should be put forward to the FIA. And he's been the driver to step up and talk about it. And my goodness me, he's just been a wonderful, wonderful addition to this Formula One season that just keeps getting better and better. 4 teams have won races, 8 teams have been on the podium. You know, all of the top 12 drivers in the championship have been on the podium at some point, plus George Russell as well, let's not forget. Like, it really has been a mixed bag this season, and 9 teams even have points this season. Really sorry, Haas. But 2021 has just been incredible. It's shown that we can have a mixed grid. We can have drivers popping up at different races. Like, Alpine looked amazing in Qatar. They haven't looked great over the last couple of races, you'd say, really, but then just popped up. And I love Formula One. I love how much the season can change and how one track can be completely different to another, and teams can just get it right on a weekend and get themselves a podium position in the likes of Fernando Alonso. Ocon as well, 5th place. Stroll, 6th place. Wonderful things to see over the course of this weekend. Final thing I want to talk about, and of course I'm wearing the McLaren jumper, is the fact that McLaren and Ferrari, it looks like the battle might be over for 3rd place in the championship. Both Ferraris outscore both McLarens again and extend their lead in the Constructors' Championship. Sainz coming out as the best of those 4 drivers on the weekend. And Norris was just so unlucky, so incredibly unlucky with that small puncture. I know we've talked about teams going a little bit long on their tyres. McLaren fell to that. Like, they just went that tiny little bit too far. He was running really, really well. And actually, Norris himself said that he might have been in and around sort of the Perez-Ocon positions later on in the race. We saw Perez gaining on Alonso with absolute ferocity towards the end of the Grand Prix. I think we might have seen Norris do a similar sort of thing, sort of through Stroll and Ocon as well, if he wouldn't have got that puncture and it wouldn't have cost him so dearly. And it's that consistency, isn't it? It's that consistency again. And I talk about Charles Leclerc, I think, every weekend, because he is just always there. Only 1 podium for Charles Leclerc this season, but he is now 1 point off Lando Norris in the Drivers' Championship. Lando Norris has 4 podiums this season, a 2nd place, 3 third places, and Charles Leclerc is just still there. He's still hunting him down. He's just always in that top 10. He's always picking up points. And I want to believe that Norris and McLaren can catch up in some way. I want to believe that Norris can hold on to this 5th place in the Drivers' Championship. But since they've had that engine change, what was it, Mexico for Daniel Ricciardo? Oh, no, sorry, Mexico for Lando Norris. I think it was the US for Daniel Ricciardo. They changed the engines up, and it's just not gone their way. And Ferrari have brought upgrade after upgrade. Ferrari have looked quicker and quicker. And I think that's just the difference between the two teams is Charles Leclerc was uncomfortable in the car on Saturday, had a horrible qualifying, so Ferrari did the utmost they could to change things around. They gave him a brand new chassis, they changed things around and made sure that he was going to be back in the points again, ended up finishing 8th. Daniel Ricciardo had an awful qualifying too, but McLaren didn't have anything to really offer him. They couldn't change things around too much. They changed the sort of setup a tiny little bit for him, but it still didn't click, still didn't work, and he still was outside the points. Even with the likes of Bottas and Gasly having terrible, terrible races, he still dropped down outside the points. So it wasn't going to be the weekend for McLaren. It was the weekend for Ferrari to just inch ever closer to that 3rd place. And I think Ricciardo was unhappy and he was just sort of left to dwell in that McLaren, and that doesn't bode well when McLaren can't step up in the same way that Ferrari do. They can't sort of match each other on what they can offer their drivers. And again, Daniel Ricciardo is the one that loses out. Let's talk about the rest of the field then, because as I said, Gasly had a torrid time. What happened to him? Well, started on the soft compound tyre and kind of needed to do an Alonso, to be honest with you. Alonso sort of showed how that could perfectly work. Gasly showed how that went completely wrong. Started on the front row of the grid, second place behind Lewis Hamilton. Yes, lost a couple of places quite early on, lost a place to Alonso, lost to Verstappen. That was kind of expected, to be honest with you. But it just got worse from there. They got the strategy completely wrong. And AlphaTauri are getting into a bit of a habit of this now, where they just really don't get the strategy right, ever, to be honest with you. I can't remember a time where I've been like, AlphaTauri absolutely nailed that weekend, or AlphaTauri absolutely went for something different and it paid off for them. It just doesn't happen for them at the moment. Aston Martin also had a good weekend. Both drivers in the points, picking up points in the Constructors' Championship, edging closer to AlphaTauri, but there's no way they're going to catch them with 2 races to go, to be honest. They're going to just be stuck in 7th place on 77 points. And I know it helped that obviously Gasly had a terrible race. Daniel Ricciardo was nowhere near. Bottas and Norris ended up dropping back a little bit. But I was very impressed with Lance Stroll. I think he did really well and has bounced back a bit. He's been really underperforming in the last few races and hasn't really shown why he's in Formula 1 for me in a little while. I know that might seem a little bit harsh, but I just think, last season when they had the opportunity to maybe have Vettel and Perez in Aston Martin, they opted to keep Lance Stroll. Obviously, Lance Stroll's a lot younger, but he needs to show quality for me. Hasn't shown in the last few races, but finally cropped up with a good result today. Alfa Romeo, Williams, Haas, they were there. If you saw them, they didn't really have too much to say this weekend. Obviously, both Williamses having punctures, and that was about all we saw of them. But that was the Qatar Grand Prix. Just 2 Grand Prix left to go. And as I said, 8 points in it. It's going to go all the way down to the wire in the Drivers' Championship, in the Constructors' Championship. Even closer still, just 5 points between the top 2 teams. But let me know in the comments down below, who do you think is winning this World Drivers' Championship? I have absolutely no idea whatsoever. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you next time.